Next agendized item is with Commissioner Williams.
All right, I placed this item on the agenda at the request of members of the community and some elected officials regarding today's Sandpoint will be reviewing an application to subdivide Bonner County property. And this has been a point of contention in our community. And so what I want to do is to make sure that I get everything right in this kind of discussion is to ask Sheriff Wheeler to come up or use the mic. He didn't leave any. No, to kind of address what your concerns and questions are, because the purpose for me on this one is to make an understanding. It's been quite some time. And as you guys know, if you participated with anything about that patch of land in between, we went back and forth for felt like decades. And so when I saw this item and it was brought to my attention, I do not recall Bonner County Board of Commissioners making a decision to subdivide. I recall that there was a motion that passed to engage Sewell Engineering for a boundary line adjustment. And that's the hearing that I attended. I did try and seek clarification to see when there was another meeting and I couldn't find that. So I want to, if we're moving forward with that application at Sandpoint, I just want to know what's right and what's wrong. So with that, Sheriff Wheeler.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chairman Bradshaw. This all started, there was a notice posted at the corner of my property 6-7 days from today.
Excuse me.
Posting
Excuse me. Whose property?
where the sheriff's office is located.
Okay.
In front of
And
our
who's
shop.
the custodian over all the?
Can I
County
speak,
property?
Mr. Bradshaw?
I believe that
Simple.
every commissioner is allowed to ask questions, Sheriff.
Well, can I
I'm
finish?
going to actually
Question?
pause for a second because
Clarity.
you two are, we don't need to be intentionally disrespectful. And you
Went
put
on for
forth,
minutes about clarity a while ago, Miss Williams.
but I wasn't disrespectful. I was honest and
I wasn't
presented.
either. I was asking straight up
No,
questions.
I'm sorry, but what you guys just did isn't appropriate. I'm asking you not to. You guys have this idea of decorum for everybody else but yourselves. It's not okay. Sheriff Wheeler came up. He respected you in your position. You should do the same, please. This is already a contentious topic. You guys don't need to insert stuff into it. That's all I'm asking for.
Thank you for that, but because this is the board and I'm the chairman, I would just like to see if my understanding is similar to the majority of the boards. 31 and Sheriff Wheeler's.
I'm actually asking you to stop because what has happened here is this is my agenda item. And I asked for sheriff, as is indicated in 1-201 subsection D, that I can call on a member to present something. Let's just have the discussion in the most reasonable way, which is not the two of you attacking Sheriff Wheeler. I asked him to come up here. I don't expect people to be disrespected if I call on them to speak. I'm asking you to please stop, look at your rules of decorum. And if you don't like that he's speaking, then leave the room. But stop interrupting him. Stop disrespecting him. This is unfortunate. We already are going to have opposing opinions on this issue. Please knock it off.
Thank you.
Sheriff Wheeler, please.
No, sir, this.
Sheriff Wheeler, you're not
9:53. Would
really.
you like to go into a recess?
I am not a petulant child, so you don't have to do that. What you're doing is not kind. It's not respectful. Please stop. I asked Sheriff Wheeler to present. Please stop.
Thank you. As chairman of the board, I would like the clarification, Sheriff. Idaho statute 31-807, management of county property. A board of county commissioners shall have the power and authority to purchase, receive by donation, or lease any real or personal property necessary for the use of the county. Preserve, take care of, manage, and control the county property, but no purchase of real property must be made unless the value of the same property has been previously estimated by a real estate appraiser licensed to appraise real property in the state of Idaho pursuant to the provisions of Idaho Code, Chapter 41, Title 54. And no more than the appraised value must be paid therefore. However, if the county assessor determines that the value of the real property is $5,000 or less, then the appraisal provided in this section shall not be required.
So I'm going to interrupt because the reason you're standing here is because of 201 subsection D to provide information on the item agendized. If Commissioner Bradshaw and Commissioner Almont want to have a discussion with the sheriff about interpretation of rules, that's an item that is not on the agenda. So can we please go back to the agenda item?
I'd like to address the Chairman Almond. I have no objection to your authority. If you allow me to make my presentation, you'll see what my concerns are. Because you have the authority to do whatever you want with the property. That's not my contention here.
Well,
So if I can finish, I would like to do
Who's,
that.
And I
Whose property?
apologize, I didn't mean to start a fire.
Bonner County, oh, you have control over the property. That's not my contention here.
thank you, Sheriff. I look forward to your remarks.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So this notice was posted that there was been a request for a subdivision of 3 parcels that is located and owned by Bonner County, and those 2 parcels were the fairgrounds and the Readiness Center, which were going to be combined. I should like to point out, and this brings up your point, Chairman. On 5/25, you submitted a rezone application to the Planning and Zoning. Prior to that submittal, there was legal agenda posted, an action item, a hearing was held before the Bonner County Board of Commissioners. There was approval by a majority of the board and a contract with James Sewell and Associates to plat and rezone portions of the Bonner County Readiness Center and the fairgrounds property. So on 9/27, after we went through the planning and zoning, the full city council approved that rezone. Then on the 27th, the city council approved the rezone along with zoning the development agreement, which is a requirement of the city of Sandpoint's rezoning process. That agreement was signed the next day on the 28th by the city council president Kate McAllister and at that time Commissioner Chairman Bradshaw. Thus, it concluded the process of rezoning the parcel, fairgrounds property, and the Bonner County Readiness Center. When I saw that, I requested copies of when any kind of meetings were done after that, when the request was going to be made to ask for a rezone of that, a subdivision of the property, which is a whole total project, a total different project. I have not, I received it 10 days later, so I do not have copies of that. When I sent this information to legal, Bill Wilson said we thought we were done with that. He had not reviewed any contracts, any proposal. He was not aware. Commissioner Williams was not aware of any legal meeting that was agendized and approval for Commissioner Ahmed or the Board of County Commissioners to request a subdivision. That is a whole new item. It's not part of that. That was finalized. That agreement was signed, and that those plat lines were changed and were recorded. My question is was there a meeting to authorize this submittal? Was there a meeting authorized the expenditures of funds to Sewell, James A. Sewell, to produce more drawings? Because one of the drawings that were submitted was created on 2/2/24, February 2nd of this year. So I'd like to know, were those funds approved by this board, or was there a secret meeting that was made that approved that?
So am I to understand you're alleging there was a secret meeting?
No, I didn't.
Oh, I just wanted to
No,
be
I'm not
clear.
alleging.
Oh,
I'm not alleging at all. It says here, the application was submitted, and Idaho Code 74-201 states formation of public policy that open meetings, the people of the state of Idaho in creating instruments of government that serve them do not yield their sovereignty to the agency so created. Therefore, the legislature finds and declares that it is the policy of this state that the formation of public policy is public business and shall not be concluded in secret. Title 74 talks about transparent ethical government. It says there in 74-208, violations in action of any deliberation or decision making that leads to an action occurs at any meeting which fails to comply with the provision of this chapter, such action shall be null and void.
would that be similar, Sheriff,
Can I-
to the
can-
ICCO meeting?
Can I actually ask you guys to stop for a second? Because this is not a hearing. We're not interrogating somebody. And so I would like the sheriff to finish his discussion, and then I would like to propose what my questions are. This is not, you're using your position to just be unkind unnecessarily. We're not talking about the ICCO or whatever you're referencing with regard to that. We're talking about a real issue that's going to happen today that members of the community care about. So I'm again asking you to adhere to the rules of decorum that you want others to adhere to and allow the sheriff to complete. And if you have a question, fine, but we're not interrogating somebody. I have questions also about this as we move forward. So please stop.
So
So-
I just finished the end of my comments the application was submitted and accepted on December, I think the 17th or 14th of this year. And prior to that, the application itself said the Bonner County Commissioners were applying for this, and Commissioner Ahmed was the signature of that. And the name of the project was the Bonner County Fairgrounds and Readiness Center. Those are two separate platted pieces of property. And I would say that the fairgrounds did not have any comment on that, the fair board. None of the other elected officials had any comment. There was no meeting that I'm aware of that discussed this before that action was taken and the expenditures of county funds to pay James Sewell. So if that's the case without a meeting and approved, that's a violation of open meeting. And so
I'll clear that up for you.
so that's what I want to know. And this is really interesting. I'll just read this section for you, which I think you may be addressing.
Well, I'm holding the contract, Sheriff, where it was voted in a public meeting with the contract that was legally signed, so it will be pretty easy to clear up.
Okay, well, what I'm saying is that the contract that was signed was for the rezone, not a subdivision of the property, and that whole process was concluded on the 27th of September, and there was all of the reports that were done. So this is from my summation. I'd like to know, was this a new deal? Was this a new contract that had to be signed? Or was this part of it? Because I know that when you talk about notice of meetings and agendas, it says agendas shall be required for each meeting, and the agenda shall be posted in the same manner as the public of the meeting. An agenda may be amended.
I have the agenda as well here, Sheriff. That was
So-
newly noticed agenda. I voted on in a public session. The contract was signed.
What is
I have
most
also things that
unfortunate
enter
is
into
you
the
keep
record.
insisting on being unkind unnecessarily. Can we just let him finish and then we can have the discussion and without the attitude? So the issue that I had was I only recall talking about the boundary land adjustment, and that was the hearing I recall some members of our community attended. When I looked for, was there another discussion, decision, action item related to that? Not only could I not find one, but Commissioner Ahmed did point back to that very first decision as that was what was moving forward. And so for me, the question was, did we give approval for a boundary line adjustment, which was a set cost of $25,000? And has the project grown without doing it in open meeting? Because I can't find another date or decision other than the one that we went back and forth on Sewell Engineering too many times if you're a business owner to have to deal with us like that. But that's the only one I remember. And so this is part of our question is, since this was during a time when we were talking about RV campground and grants, maybe one of the two of you have information for this meeting that could address the concern that what was voted on was valid as we move into what's happening today at Sandpoint, because people had questions. And I would like to have that conversation in a way that if you have a date of a hearing, to just tell us what date this decision was made, and we can listen to the tape and we can say we lost the battle or we have an error. We need to stop moving forward and actually make a decision. That's what needs to happen on this. And it's reasonable because that went back and forth a lot. And this has been a point of contention. So Commissioner Ahmed, did you want to share the decision date and what the decision was? And then, because this and then we can just confirm that and we'd be done.
And I'd like some clarification. So what is a decision in open meetings in public is any determination, action, vote, or final disposition upon a motion, proposal, resolution, order, ordinance, or measure in which a vote of governing body is required at any meeting at which a quorum is present. And the second part is that, but shall not include those ministerial or administrative actions necessary to carry out the decision previously adopted in the meeting held in compliance with this chapter. So my question was, during those discussions, there was never the word subdivision mentioned in any of those. And so if that was part of the project that James Sewell was, that they were going to do boundary line adjustments and they were going to create a subdivision, then I'd like to have that clarification, because at this point, there was a separate action, a separate application, a separate allocation of spending funds for James Sewell that's separate from the one that was passed in 9/27/23 and was finalized. So those are the questions I have.
Mr. Bradshaw?
Yeah, I don't remember the word subdivision, but I remember when we were having the back and forth with it, and he was already halfway into the work of doing the adjustments in his surveying, and we had okayed for him to finish that work. And so he may have called it a subdivision. I don't know. I would have to look at that, but yeah, I think that was just him completing what he was hired to do in the original contract.
So I remember testifying, if I may speak, at the Planning and Zoning, and the Planning and Zoning Committee said, all this does is it changes the zoning of that property. It doesn't change anything else. If there's going to be any projects or any other work that has to be done, the county will have to come back to them and make those proposals.
That was my understanding.
So this is a different proposal. So that was finalized and that was signed. And I'm not an attorney, but I would like to ask the attorneys, I'd like to ask, is this a separate proposal? Is this a violation of the open meeting law, or was this?
Or
part
it
of
could
that?
be a complete misunderstanding too, because if I think back to those days, they were rough. And so the question is, if we need, because for me, it's not going to be a piece of paper that will confirm what the decision was. It's actually going to be going back to the tape and listening to what the decision was, and then what is happening, because we need to make sure before because one of the things, if I remember, the city told us is the zone change was actually going to devalue our property as a county,
Sure.
and that wasn't recommended, but that this push was being made in part because of wanting the RV campground on that land. And that's what was at one time reported to be necessary when we had two conflicts. Because at one point, our director of planning said, we don't need to do it. But then there was something that said we did need to do it. And so I'm wondering, and I put it as this because it was just a discussion, not to have an argument. Should we ask the city of Sandpoint to delay this decision until we confirm that we did everything correctly before we move forward and cause unnecessary negativity in our community over an already contentious piece of property that we've been going back and forth on? And so I actually, Commissioner Bradshaw, that's how I heard it. I never heard the word that we were doing a subdivision. I heard it as actually specific boundary line adjustment was what I was told. And we had a cap of $25,000. And I don't recall seeing it come back after that hearing. So my motion that I'm suggesting is, unless and until the board can show that the current application to subdivide the property referred to as the Readiness Center was a decision made by the Board of County Commissioners shall ask the city of Sandpoint to table their review and decision pending confirmation from Bonner County Prosecutor's Office that the application was submitted in accordance with the rules that govern. And that makes it let's just do it right the one time. So
There is a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Nope.
Hearing none, the motion dies. But before we move on to the next agendized
No,
item,
I'm going to actually call for order. If
The-
you're not going to second the motion for
and
discussion,
the motion
no,
dies.
so then
As
we're,
chairman,
no.
I will continue because you
No.
asked a question which I will answer,
actually,
Commissioner.
then you should have
I
seconded the
will
motion for a
enter-
vote.
I don't have to ask your permission as chairman
No,
to
but
speak, Commissioner Williams. but I
Robert's rules of,
appreciate-
I'm not giving permission. I'm talking
I
about
know
Robert's
you're
rules of order. No, I'm talking about Robert's rules of order is what you wanted
You
in
pushed
order to
really
get in.
hard, but never follow.
When you want to have the discussion, that's the value of seconding the motion, is it pushes it into the discussion
Thank you,
phase.
Sharon.
If you decline to second it, then you
Sorry,
decline to discuss it.
So I will enter into the record the notice from that was duly noticed this 24th day of April 2023. I will also into the record the memorandum duly noticed April 27th, 2023 that reads the firm of James A. Sewell and Associates has already been retained to assist Bonner County with the construction and permitting of a campground near the Bonner County Fairgrounds. Due to previously unforeseen circumstances, Bonner County requires additional work on the site, specifically the platting of the entire fairgrounds property itself, as well as the county-owned property to the south. This work is required before the county can execute a boundary line adjustment expanding the fairgrounds property to encapsulate the site of the campground, which currently straddles the boundary line between the fairgrounds and a vacant parcel to the south, which was signed by Chairman Steve Bradshaw on April 27th, 23. I will also enter into the record the signed work order contract from James A. Sewell and Associates that says the services to be provided are the final plat and the boundary line adjustment. And it is indeed fortunate that I have reached out to the city of Sandpoint, verifying that this is the completion of that project. I spoke with the engineer who has been involved in all of these projects yesterday to confirm, and he explained that subdivision is a technical term, and this is the completion of this contract, and that we are under budget. Our next agenda
So
is.
actually, I'm going to ask a question of Bill Wilson, since you made a comment post letting it fail. The actual statement that you read didn't use the same language of this application. And so is it reasonable? And I'm not saying I know, this is a question. Is it reasonable to say that what the current application is that was submitted in December of 2023 the same, because it's not an extent, I don't see how it can be an extension since it's a new application to begin, and ours was a boundary line adjustment, which is what he read the decision was. And it sounds like the reading of what he just said says that we are doing another phase of a project. And I'll point out also, Bill, that when it was originally being discussed back then, it was talking about an RV campground, but that is not what we're doing now. And so what we approved was boundary line adjustment. And so the application that Sandpoint is reviewing is not a boundary line adjustment. It is actually a subdivision, which is not what our write-up actually made a decision on. Given what Luke said, is it reasonable that we re-vote on that issue and give pause because we didn't vote to subdivide that land?
I'm not prepared to give legal advice on this issue.
Is it reasonable for the board
Commissioner,
to ask?
That item has died. We are on to our next agenda.
I actually am going to push because you didn't allow it to die. You spoke after. Is it reasonable that in order to mitigate potential litigation on this issue, that the board send it to you for a thorough review?
Bill, I
Bill?
think part of the problem is definition of subdivision in Bonner County Planning Department versus City of Sandpoint. And they may or may not have a definition of lot line adjustment. They may call that a subdivision. But that would just be a guess, but
Commissioner Bradshaw, would you agree then to let us get confirmation?
No.
Because if you're right, then there wouldn't be an issue, but it would actually settle some disputes within
I
the
think-
county
I
about the
think
land.
the motion's dead.
There is no motion. Our next agendized item was brought forth by myself.